I've recently played a string of games on Magic the Gathering Arena that made me ask, why do we concede games? More often than not, games are either won or lost by concession. It took me back to when I used to play League of Legends, where FF at 15 was a popularized idea and violently verbally encouraged, if not adhered to. In fact, I'm sure it still is. So, why do we give up upon facing adversity? Is it because we can see 4 steps ahead and we know what the outcome is? Or is there a deeper meaning to the psychology to losing and how we respond to failure? That's what I wanted to explore. To do this, I had to get into the mindset of someone fit for the task, so I edited my video like the Trinket Mage. To put this question to the test, I ran through 11 games in a row and collected the results. My only rule was not to concede so that I may understand the difference between concession and letting a game play out, all while writing down why I would have conceded if I desired to do that at all. In total, I went 7 and 4. In the 7 games I won, all were conceded by my opponent, yet I never got a consistent answer to why that game actually ended. Some reasons were obvious, like winning the next turn, or I had an overwhelming board presence and no answer to it. However, others puzzled me. In one game, I removed my opponent's commander. In another, I protected my commander with a spell, and in a third game, I guess I took too long to pass the turn. Now, I'm aware that in all of these games, which there are not a lot to begin with, so it's to really understand the reality of this complex idea, but in all of the games, I couldn't have really known why my opponent conceded. I'm not going to ignore the idea that players may hit the surrender button because their food is ready to eat and the game doesn't force you to play, but I'm searching to see if there's consistencies to quitting and is it linked to something bigger. So I started with some non-video game related research. I first took a look at the psychology of giving up by Walden University, and they had said, though meeting the goals that we may set seem like the only option, the truth is that in certain circumstances, giving up is sometimes a viable choice. We can write out our gains and losses you will experience if you get out, similar to creating a pros and cons list, and the exercise will help highlight the potential missed opportunities, forgotten possibilities if you were to walk away and put your energy elsewhere. But this stretch of thought seemed to linger towards goals, habits, or lifetime achievements rather than a quick game of Magic the Gathering. You don't really have time to write down pros and cons mid-game, so does this reality of knowing when you should quit being a good thing really apply to video games? I mean, this refers to removing yourself from a given circumstance, period, not going back. But in video games, we're removing ourselves from one game just so that we can replace it with another. So when it comes to Magic the Gathering or any online game where you have the power to surrender in your hands, is there actually negative connotations to doing that, seeing as though the connotations of surrendering or giving up in reality or in our long-term goals seems to be a viable potential option? Does that same apply here? Now, I want to be clear. I want to understand more about why we concede, if there ever was more of a reason other than the simple, hey, it saves time so we can both move on. The Magic forums seem to be pro-conceding because of wait times, clicking resolve while just staring down their demise. It seems to be almost polite etiquette. I took a few quotes from Reddit to get a better understanding of how people felt about the idea of conceding and why they concede. A quote said, "If I get counterspelled on turn 2 or 3, I instantly concede 100% of the time. Trying to play around infinite bounce spells and counterspells requires more brain power than I'm ever willing to give this game. I play for fun, and that shit is not fun, LMAO." So maybe we concede because the terms of fun is actually never established between the two players. In a casual game of Commander, both players get to discuss what their deck does before the game begins. Heck, now we have brackets to help with that. In other formats like Standard, there are only a handful of deck mechanics that are being played, meaning you have an idea of what you're up against relatively, and I say that tentatively because I'm sure it's not always the case. But I want to stay on topic of casual gameplay because in tournaments or formats where prizing is issued, surrendering would be seen less. Maybe? Is it? I'm not sure. That I would have to give its own video. We've sure seen high-ranking players playing Pro Tours concede, So why can't we do it? I stumbled upon an article as well that said that concessions are usually thought of as a letdown. A game was going on and then it just ended. Magic demonstrates that they can instead be meaningful and exciting. This was another quote about the rules on tournaments' use of concessions, where concessions actually can pose as a beneficial loss to better the odds against your opponent and the clock. But what benefit do we get from surrendering? More games for more potential wins, or perhaps more games where the individual believes they are in a fairer matchup? It's no secret that Magic's algorithm is, well, interesting, to say the least. I can't begin to tell you how many token decks I've happened to play against while rocking my Kambal Profiting Mayor. It almost seemed unfair at times. At some point, I had to back out and wonder if MTG Arena was trying to give me free wins. But hey, maybe the competing deck weights at that time just happened to be around the same number. They just happened to be playing at that time and they just happened to be token decks. Something to consider. That last article, by the way, had gone on to say that the law of game design states, fortunately, Magic has long since solved the issue of players wanting to concede or perhaps needing to concede by allowing players to concede. Magic gives them the option of relocating time that would be spent in a doomed enterprise to games that can still be won. Players can now focus on the interesting games. Which makes sense again if we were talking about timed matches. But Magic the Gathering Arena, this is an online, free-to-play, untimed kind of game. So why do we still take advantage of this mechanic if we're not timed? Perhaps the question lies within control. When the power is in your hands, did you really lose? Well, yes, but technically no. Okay, so just ignore Big Bear when he did this, because he just likes the meme. You still lose. You still lose. You conceded, you lost. So, yeah, he likes the meme. When we voluntarily do something uncomfortable, we save ourselves from unpleasantries that we would otherwise occur if we didn't consent to the action. Bungee jumping is still terrifying, but it's more digestible than someone pushing you off a cliff. Are we so afraid of the feeling of losing brought to us by somebody else? Although not entirely, as games could have been determined by your own misplay or other reason, external force maybe. Better I choose when I lose rather than the opponent. Interesting behavior, perhaps to protect ourselves. Maybe. But is the reality of losing that bad in a game? Also maybe. Even very likely. But then again, if we go on to start playing a game to begin with, have we already consented the idea that we may lose? Well, that's also up for grabs. What I seem to have learned about Magic the Gathering is that maybe the online Magic is about me or I playing Magic the Gathering and not we. Suppose my stuff gets removed or my game plan doesn't work out. Then I'm no longer having fun or I'm not playing my decks, so I would rather go somewhere else to play for me and not we. As I was playing in those 11 games I mentioned earlier, I put together a selection of reasons why I generally thought people did surrender. They use that game mechanic for a particular reason outside of the general feeling the need or the desire to give up. Stuff like a game has gone on for too long and you genuinely have to leave. Well, you have the right to. Maybe your opening hand and subsequent mulligans have been dreadful and you don't see any advantage to learning how to play or succeeding in playing your deck by continuing. Hey, maybe your PC just turns off. Or you surrender before passing, knowing that you will in fact lose next turn. Now these all seem like reasonable excuses. So why do I ask, why do we concede? Well, because I'm curious to know what percentage of games could have been winnable if the individual had stuck out. Maybe you do have 2 4/4 angels breathing lethal down your neck, and all hope is gone. But your farewell card might be in your next top 3 potential pools. Assuming your opponent doesn't have a clear answer to it or they put more threats on the board. The complexity behind giving up outside of video games and why we do that, how that attitude fundamentally shapes how we perceive how games should be going and what we should do in response to potentially losing. That seems to be quite complex, especially when you amalgamate those reasons that are potential downfalls to us learning how to play, becoming better at the game, and overall developing our skill, and the general complexities of life, the systems in which are in place, the external forces and internal forces that we have that all contribute to a multitude of clear reasons to why individuals may surrender a game to begin with. They're either not having fun, they have their opponent at lethal, and they are taking their whole turn to play as many cards as possible on the board before swinging out and taking you out of the game. There are so many complex reasons that it began to become difficult to understand, well, why do we concede? And then it hit me. The answer I had been looking for. All along, right in front of me. I had forgotten how to spell the word concede, so I googled it and voila, the answer lies bare in front of me. To concede isn't to give up or surrender, it's to admit defeat. To concede is to acknowledge your faults. And now that I have, I can reflect, double back, rewatch the footage if you will, find out where I went wrong, and oh hey, cool, another game.